When it comes to mainstream circles and the mainstream media in particular, when MGTOW is discussed, it usually devolves to mentioning misogyny or MGTOW supposedly hating women and how MGTOW is supposedly a misogynistic hate group, and how its proponents do this or that misogynistic thing. You have probably seen it yourself when reading mainstream reporting on MGTOW by CNN or even the Wikipedia page and how it's misogynistic or male supremacist, without them doing much to try to understand our perspectives on the issues of the world. And there are also some in the red pill rage phase, as it's called, who, while it's understandable why they have the opinions they have, do not end up doing their best and thus give the mainstream sources ammo in their reporting, despite the argument made by these sources not being valid. However, I'm here to offer a different take, a unique one in my opinion. My opinion as to why misogyny does not help MGTOW and actually hurts it, and helps nobody at all, and thus ultimately why MGTOW isn't misogynistic. I will explain the 5 reasons as to why misogyny helps nobody to help prove my point, and thus that MGTOW isn't misogynistic from the perspective of our own interests. So with that being said, let's begin. Reason number 1. It gives too much attention to women. You might not understand where I'm coming from, or why I suggested this reason, but hear me out. Misogyny, as in the hatred of women, stems from the same basic flaws as simping to women does. Namely, that it focuses on women and not yourself, and in many aspects, giving your own attention, time and energy to them, while depriving yourself of that. Hating women and actively despising them is as flawed and ridiculous as simping towards them. The point of the MGTOW philosophy was to focus on yourself and go your own way, and that includes achieving self-actualization and independence. The goal with MGTOW is to be your own man and thus go your own way. Hating women while on the complete opposite spectrum of from simping towards them or loving them and pandering to them still gives more energy to women and drains you of it. Instead of reinvesting your own time and effort back into yourself and your fellow men around you. It is for this reason that I think misogyny helps nobody and is therefore not MGTOW and not beneficial to MGTOW. Reason number 2. It normalizes hatred of other groups of people. Aside from it basically having the same flaws as simping via the fact it gives too much energy to others when that's not the point of MGTOW, instead of being able to focus on yourself and your own interests via self-actualization, which is actually what MGTOW is about, it is also a gateway to other prejudices against other groups of people based on characteristics which they do not control, which in my viewpoint does not help push the message and does not help our interests. If you're predisposed to hating one group of people, you're going to be predisposed to hating other groups of people as the same mechanism of action is still in play. I have noticed this happening on Twitter, and especially outside of the MGTOW philosophy and those who view themselves as MGTOW. TERFs, the worst kinds of radical feminists, do not even like their own gender which they claim to defend, let alone others, and this can be seen by some of their takes, where some of them dislike others for their race, religion, or even orientation, in particular calling those they find undesirable to be quote-unquote groomers, and other accusations like it being used when it comes to the last one, which, by the way, also have an origin point with the Me Too style accusations because they're both the same thing, a false accusation against a target person for things the target person did not do. Because hatred of other groups of people, an active dislike, is as much of a time waster as simping is, it is unhelpful and completely defeats the point of MGTOW, which is to go our own way and do our own thing and self-actualize. For this reason, I consider it to not be a MGTOW thing, and thus consider any accusation of us hating women as stupid and fundamentally flawed. Reason number 3. It makes MGTOW look bad. The fact of the matter is that at this moment optics matter, and they matter a lot. We already have the mainstream media making up flawed comparisons between the MGTOW philosophy and the ideology of incels and pickup artists, treating them as the same, when it's different, with an unfriendly media landscape, and the rest of the Manosphere not really being helpful in this regard, especially the pickup artists who just sell poison, we need to be able to prove to the average normie that the MGTOW philosophy is what we say it is, as in prove that it is a lifestyle philosophy about going our own way and avoiding the pitfalls of marriage and long-term relationships to avoid losing resources via flawed laws. Now, to everyone who already knows how MGTOW works, how this philosophy works, this should already be obvious, but unfortunately the average person does not have this level of understanding. As such, we need to make sure that there are no misunderstandings about what MGTOW does and does not do, and who it's for. Unfortunately, hatred of women happens to create this very misunderstanding that we want to prevent, thus undermining our goals. Given the circumstances, I do not believe we can afford to have any room for mistake or setbacks that could negatively affect our image as seen by the outside world, thus informing my viewpoint on this topic. If someone is too busy actively hating women to be a proper team player, then that means they won't do what is in our best interests, which means they won't be effective and won't be able to help MGTOW grow. To be effective is to realize what situation we are in and how best to adapt it and thrive in it. As such, this is why, according to our own interests, I think misogyny helps nobody and thus is not MGTOW. Reason number 4. It does not help MGTOW grow and expand. Throughout the history of MGTOW, at least from the perspective of us content creators who make content on it, and discuss it, our goal has always been to see this philosophy grow and expand as much as possible and to see as many men as possible adopt it for themselves, so that they do not have to deal with the issues related to the institution of marriage, and in general the problems of relationships, and also to normalize being single as the new default in society. We have successfully done this for at least the last 10 years, as now, even if a good portion of single men do not call themselves MGTOW, they are already going their own way, in the fact that they are single and just doing their own thing. Our track record with regards to whether we succeeded in our goal is clear. We did succeed, and MGTOW has grown from what it once was in the early 2010s to what it is now. However, we can do more and we can do better, significantly better. The problem though is that misogyny threatens to curtail any further progress we can make on this goal, or even reverse it, if allowed to have influence, as people will think incorrectly that we hate women, and that our philosophy is marked by it, when it is not, and thus would discourage new men who didn't hear of it before from participating, and might even cause men already adhering to it to leave, which is counterproductive to our overall efforts. So, for the sake of defending our efforts and our progress, and ensuring that we can keep it up, I'm against misogyny, and it's further evidence that the claim that MGTOW and misogyny are the same thing is completely false, because we understand our interests and what they entail and what these interests are compatible with. So, even if you strip away any kind of morals, just by looking at our interests, one can easily see that the interests of us MGTOWs and the interests of those who practice misogyny are not the same, and therefore that MGTOW is not and never has been misogynistic. And finally, reason number 5, it does not reflect the values of the MGTOW philosophy. When it comes to our core values and principles, at least the 4 basic tenets of MGTOW, which are: be male, don't be married, don't be in a long-term relationship, and don't cohabitate, it is very obvious what MGTOW as a philosophy was intended to accomplish, and whether or not it is against women or against the system. It is a philosophy that was intended to help defend men's rights and independence by favoring being single and self-reliant, thus giving men the tools needed to solve their own problems and live free. However, I fail to see how the blind hatred of women on the basis of gender fits into any of this. This is part of the reason I dislike the incels and pickup artists and why I have a negative opinion of them, and is also why, while I'm sort of understanding of red pill rage and why it exists, I do not really encourage it or endorse it. Even when technologies like the artificial womb are discussed, the intent is to free men and advocate for our own independence and self-reliance, not to harm anyone or hate on others. The entire point of MGTOW is to go our own way and do our own thing, so that in our lives we can have peace of mind and we have full control over our resources and we can do what we want, without being bothered or controlled by others or being burdened with control over others. Repealing the 19th Amendment, for example, as much as it is a position some have, is a position that would burden us with having to deal with women and make their problems our problems, which is a negative for us, not a positive. The logical extent of MGTOW and of MGTOW thinking as we see it on this channel is to go from the individual going our own way as individuals to men going their own way from marriage, relationships, and even dating on the collective level, and thus divesting from that, redirecting our energies towards better and more useful endeavors. This is why the MGTOW philosophy, despite all possible obstacles being sent its way, still managed to succeed and grow into what it is today. However, one has to be mindful to not have our philosophy end up like the ideologies of the incels and pickup artists, who in my view are actually the ones that are hateful towards others, having seen how they have behaved in the past and how they act now. We should avoid falling into the same kinds of pitfalls they fell in, and moreover, we have to consider the fact that moving from being a total simp for women who panders to them to someone who hates them constantly is just moving from one end of the extreme to the other, when in reality you should be at the center, away from both extremes, in order to avoid falling for the trap and in order to remain free and be able to fully go your own way. The ideal for going our own way is to go from having to deal with them in the context of marriage, relationships, and or dating, to not having to think about them at all, if possible. Moving slightly back towards what I said about redirecting our energies and thus the energies of men towards better and more useful endeavors, I want to iterate that I do not see the heavy focus or attention directed towards women, be it to like them or to hate them, as something that is better and more useful. Ultimately, the weaknesses of those who are misogynistic, and could be accurately described by that term, are similar in kind to those of the Sims, and it is thus imperative that MGTOW as a philosophy remains separate and distant from those weaknesses and drawbacks for our own sake, purely out of self-interest. In part of maintaining said distance, we should also condemn the behavior we see as helping no one and causing more problems than it solves. This is why I'm making this video and making this point. Fortunately, I have faith that people will see this video and will conclude correctly that MGTOW is not misogynistic, as it is unfairly described by others, and also understand why misogyny is not helpful to our overall goals in pushing our message forward, and why it's actually harmful for everyone, including MGTOW, and thus why we do not stand by such things and why we are not like that. Ultimately, to summarize my points, the reason why MGTOW is not misogynistic, as is falsely claimed by the mainstream media, is not only due to moral considerations, but more importantly, considerations governed by our own interests, and in particular self-interest, and what helps us grow and what actually hurts our potential and makes things worse for us. My 5 reasons are the following. 1. It gives too much attention to women. 2. It normalizes hatred of other groups of people. 3. It would make MGTOW look bad. 4. It does not help MGTOW grow and expand. And 5. It does not reflect MGTOW values. Because we in MGTOW have long-term foresight in terms of strategy over whether something will benefit MGTOW or not, we understand things that the incels, pickup artists, dating coaches, or what you consider the rest of the Manosphere does not. Despite the repeated narratives of MGTOW supposedly being misogynistic by the mainstream media, we actually have the understanding that the philosophy is not responsible for the actions and the biases of those who adhere to it, and also that misogyny and ideological positions similar to it cause more harm than it could possibly help. More harm to MGTOW in particular. As such, we reject it in favor of MGTOW and MGTOW values. Even those who go through the red pill rage, as it's called, eventually grow out of it because even they realize what is important and beneficial not only for themselves, but for MGTOW and the greater good as a whole, and what isn't. If something doesn't help us and only hurts everyone, including ourselves, even in terms of self-interest in the process, then it shouldn't be endorsed, and in my opinion and my viewpoint is not MGTOW and not something we would do. Thus, MGTOW is not and never has been misogynistic as is claimed. That is my take on this issue. With that being said, this has been Igor MGTOW and Video Games. Like and subscribe and click the bell notifications on YouTube if you enjoyed the video, and follow me on odyssey.com, mgtow.tv, Twitter, Blue Sky, and Rumble, and join my Discord server, and bye bye. Thanks for watching. To be fair, I almost said Gilded, but then I remembered Gilded doesn't exist. Anyways, intermission over. If you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, and bye bye.